started now. I want to welcome you all to the David Steine Memorial Lecture. This lecture series was established in 1978 in honor of the memory of David Steine, Professor of Business Administration at the College of Arts and Sciences from 1951 until his death in 1976. David was a gifted teacher with a special interest in his students. He was also a patron of the arts and a prominent civic leader in Nashville. The lectureship has been endowed through the generosity of Peggy Steine, her family, and David friends, colleagues, and visiting associates. Each lecture addresses a problem of interest to the general public. This year's Steine lecturer is Alvin Roth. He is the Craig and Susan McCaw Professor of Economics at Stanford University and the Gunn Professor of Economics and Business Administration Emeritus at Harvard University. He received his Ph.D. in Operations Research from Stanford in 1974 and held positions at the University of Illinois, University of Pittsburgh, and Harvard before moving to Stanford in 2013. He has received numerous honors and awards, including being named a Fellow of the Econometric Society, a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and he is currently the President-elect of the American Economic Association. In 2012, he received the Nobel Prize in Economics for the theory of stable allocations and the practice of market design. Professor Roth is the author of more than 180 articles on topics in game theory, bargaining theory, and experimental economics. He's best known for his game theoretic techniques, showing how game theoretic techniques may be used in designing markets where money is not the only factor determining resource allocation. He's applied his work to the matching of medical residents in hospitals, kidney donors and recipients, and students in high schools. He has a unique ability to show how economic theory can be applied to important economic problems and have a positive impact on society. His topic for today is who gets what and why, the new economics of matching and market design. So please join me in welcoming Professor Alvin Roth.
I'm glad to be here. So I'm ostensibly going to talk about a recent book of mine today, and it's called Who Gets What and Why. And it's about markets. And it actually came out over the summer. It came out in June. And so now is the time of year when translations are starting to come out. And that's sort of fun. You have translations of a book on markets because languages and markets have a lot in common. They're both human artifacts. They're both ancient human artifacts that people make so that we can cooperate and coordinate with each other better. And just as there are lots of different kinds of languages, there are lots of different kinds of markets. And markets and marketplaces, which is mostly what I'll talk about, are more amenable to design than languages. Language is also an artifact, but if I decided to improve on the English language and write my book with phonetic spellings, you would all think I was illiterate. Whereas when we look at marketplaces, if they're not working as well as they should, we can tinker with them and try to make them work better. And one of the things I want to do today is expand your idea of what a market is and a marketplace. Because a lot of times when we think about markets, if we just think about them casually, we think about commodity markets. And commodity markets are markets where prices do all the work, and you can deal anonymously with other people just trying to find a price. So when you buy 500 shares of some stock on the New York Stock Exchange, you don't care who you're dealing with. You don't have to know who they are. You don't worry whether they've taken good care of those shares while they have them, and they don't worry whether you'll take good care of the shares when you have them. You just need to find a price at which the two of you are willing to transact. And the job of the New York Stock Exchange is price discovery, to find the prices at which supply equals demand from moment to moment for all the many financial commodities that are sold on the New York Stock Exchange. But in lots of markets, that isn't the case. We don't allow prices to do all the work. And you don't deal anonymously. You care who you're dealing with. And the point of the market may be to match you up with someone. Labor markets are like that. But in some matching markets, we don't even let prices do any of the work, and I'll tell you about some of those today as well. So for example, college admissions. Vanderbilt could choose its entering class by raising tuition until supply equaled demand and just enough freshmen wanted to come to Vanderbilt to fill the available classrooms. But that's not the way Vanderbilt chooses its freshman class. Lots of people would like to come to Vanderbilt. So the price does include a market. Many more people would like to come at the current price than could come. So there are these other market clearing mechanisms. There's application procedures and essays and interviews, and you can't just attend Vanderbilt. You can't just choose to come. You have to be admitted. And so matching markets are precisely those markets in which you can't just choose what you want, even if you can afford it. You also have to be chosen. And it's not just college admissions, of course. Labor markets are like that as well. You can't tell Google that you're coming to work. You have to be hired. And of course, Google can't tell you that you're coming to work. They have to woo you as well. They have to compete with Facebook. So these are markets that have a lot of courtship in them. And that makes them a little bit like marriage, right? So labor markets and college admissions are a little bit like finding a spouse. You can't just choose your spouse. You also have to be chosen. Okay? And institutions that make that process work well will serve us better than if it's difficult to find the right matches. So let's think a little bit about what marketplaces have to do in order to make markets work well. And I'm going to tell you some things that I think all marketplaces have to do. But let me use, as a familiar example, let me use Airbnb. Okay, so let's think about what Airbnb has to do to make a market for travelers and hosts who are looking for temporary guests and temporary accommodations. The first thing a marketplace has to do, the first thing Airbnb had to do, was to make its market thick. They had to make themselves a place where lots of travelers would come and lots of hosts would come, lots of listings would be available. And the way they did that initially is they bought competitors. So Airbnb started in San Francisco, and other similar websites started elsewhere, Crashpadder in England, and initially as they grew, Airbnb acquired these other sites, so they would have travelers in England who wanted to come to San Francisco, and they would offer housing to San Franciscans who wanted to go to England, and so forth. So that's how they made the market thick. They assembled smaller marketplaces of travelers and hosts. And so today, their competitors aren't other websites. Their competitors are giant corporations like Hilton Hotels. And to deal with a thick market, you have to overcome problems of congestion. Congestion is a penalty of success. Once the market is thick and there are lots of travelers who want rooms and lots of rooms that would like reservations, you have to make a marketplace that makes it easy for those people to find each other. And to see the problem that Airbnb had to solve, imagine how difficult it would be to rent a room in Hilton Hotels if you could only inquire about one room at a time. Because that's sort of a problem that Airbnb has. Most of its hosts just deal with one property at a time. So you would call up Hilton Hotels and you'd say, next Friday, Hilton San Francisco, next Friday I'd like to be in San Francisco. Do you have a place for me? And they'd say, well, which room would you like? You'd say, room 579. They'd say, oh, I'm so sorry, room 579 is booked next Friday. And then as they hung up and you said, wait, don't hang up yet, you'd have to dial again and you'd say, how about room 578? There was nothing special about room 579. What I really wanted to know is, do you have a room? And of course, Hilton Hotels has solved that problem by having their receptionists be able to see all the rooms that are available. So you don't have to ask one room at a time. You can go to Hilton Hotels and they are a central marketplace for all the rooms that the Hilton offers. But Airbnb can't do that. So they had to develop their website so that it wouldn't be too congested. When they started, the way it worked was if I had a room in my apartment that I wanted to rent, I would put it on the website in the morning before I went to work. You would look at it during the day and decide that it would be a nice room and you would like to have it next Friday, and you would sort of apply for it. You'd ask if you could have it. When I came home in the evening, I would find 6 people interested in my room. I could only accept one of them. Maybe I accept the first one who applied. And I'd have to tell 5 of you, I'm sorry, room 578 isn't available. Right? And you would have to start again to try to find another room. So one of the things that Airbnb learned to do is now if one of you wants to rent my room, it immediately becomes invisible to everyone else. When everyone else looks for a room in the Bay Area, they no longer see my room, even before I've said yes to you. That way, once I say yes to you, I don't have to say no to 5 other people. So it was a way of making their website less congested. Another thing they did is they really heavily pushed the hosts that they should not just use their laptops, they should use their smartphones and use an app so they could check during the day and respond quickly. And in this way, they handled the problem of congestion. They're still not as good as Hilton hotels, but given that they're much cheaper, they're good enough for congestion. Now, the last thing that marketplaces have to do is make the market trustworthy and reliable. So I should have some confidence that if you rent my room, you're not going to leave it in a mess, or you're not going to destroy anything, and you should have some confidence that the picture I show is actually the room that you would get, and the location I describe is that you would get, and that I reliably leave the key where I say I would leave the key, and things like that. So we both developed reputations on the system that allow us to trust each other, and that's an important thing in markets as well. And I'll talk about each of these things a little bit in context of other markets, how to get thickness, how to deal with congestion, and how to make the market safe to participate in various ways. Now, I've helped design a number of different matching markets. I'll tell you about some of them today and about some other markets as well. Some of the markets that I've worked with, prices are very important, right? So there are labor markets like the medical match, which has wages, even though that's not what determines who gets what, and markets for economists and for teachers. And some of the markets don't allow prices to be used at all. So school choice systems, we don't allow, for public schools, we don't allow parents to pay more and get the best kindergarten slots in a municipal school system. And I'm going to talk to you about kidney exchange, where we don't allow money to be paid for kidneys for transplant. But all of these are matching markets, whether there are prices or not. What makes them matching markets is you care who you're matched with in the labor market. And prices don't do all the work. Now, I'm not going to talk today in any length about the medical match, but I'll talk at some length about school choice systems, and some of the things we now do in school choice are closely resemble things done in the medical match. So for those of you who maybe just participated in what I assume was the very successful medical match here at Vanderbilt just earlier this month, I'll be able to tell you a little about that. But let me tell you about school choice, which is a marketplace in the sense that we think that families have some valuable information about which schools would be good for their children. And what you'd like to do is to use that information about that's embodied in the preferences of the families for where their children should go to school. You'd like to use that information in the assignment of children to schools. And this is a market where we don't let prices do any of the work. I'm choosing markets like that to talk about right now to emphasize that markets are more than just instruments for price discovery. Now, in most municipal school systems, the thickness of the market is not an issue because schooling is mandatory through high school in the United States. So we have no trouble getting customers for our municipal school systems. But congestion and safety can be big problems. So let me tell you a little about that and how it appeared in various places. And in particular, I'll tell you a bit about New York City and about Boston, which are the two school systems that my colleagues and I started to help redesign. And that work has gone on with other school systems as well. So let me tell you about New York City when Attila Abdulkadiroglu and Parag Patak and I first got a call asking us to help redesign their matching system. So New York City is our biggest municipal school district in the United States. There are about 1.2 million kids, and about 90,000 of them enter the 9th grade each year. And we were just asked to handle the high school admissions. And the way they used to do it was they would ask each student to submit a list of 5 choices, ranked, first choice, second choice, down to 5th choice. And then each student's list was Xeroxed and sent to the high schools as their application. And then the high schools would independently make admissions decisions, communicate those to the Department of Education, which would send out a first letter to people who were admitted to high schools in the first round. And about 17,000 of those 90,000 students were admitted to multiple high schools. And their letter would say, you've been admitted to these high schools, please choose one and get back to us. And you can also choose to be on a waiting list for some high school if you wish. And once those students had made their choices, it was possible to send out more admissions letters because those students had freed up some places by turning down some admissions. And they only had time to go through this process 3 times, at the end of which there were still 30,000 children who were unassigned. So late in the year, in August, they would assign 30,000 of the 90,000 children to schools that they hadn't expressed any preferences for, just because it was time to go to school and the process had run out of time. So that was a congestion problem. But there were some other problems as well. Remember, the school saw the rank order list, which means if I'm the principal of the school and you want to apply to my school, I get a copy of your rank order list, and I can look at it and say, oh, look at that. You've applied to me as your 3rd choice. I could adopt a policy that says, you know, a lot of kids apply to our school. I'm only going to admit kids who apply to us as their 1st choice. Now, of course, if many schools adopt that policy, which many did, it means that you don't really have 5 choices. You might only have 1 or 2 choices, because if you put as your 2nd choice a school that will only admit kids who apply as their 1st choice, you won't get in. It also means that you can't safely reveal your preferences. You can't decide which is the school you'd like to go to best and write that down as your 1st choice and which school 2nd, because it might be you have very little chance of getting into your 1st choice. But your only chance of getting into your 2nd choice is if you list it as your 1st choice. So you have to think not what's my 1st choice, but what's the best school I can get into if I claim that it's my 1st choice. Right? So that's a process that's causing you to conceal the essential information that we'd like to have, which is which schools would you like to be in, or which schools would you like your kid to be in. So it wasn't safe for families to reveal their true preferences. They had to be very strategic. And it turned out it wasn't safe for principals to play in this game either. And there was a problem where principals would conceal capacities, because remember, 30,000 kids were going to come on the market very late. And if you were a principal and you revealed all your places, you would get essentially a random assignment of those 30,000 kids. But if you concealed some places, if you said that 3 classrooms on the 1st floor are under construction and we can't admit students to them, and then you discovered on September 1st that the renovations had been completed, you could admit 3 additional classes of students over the counter, as they said, among people who were unhappy with the assignments that they'd gotten. Something similar, but different, happened in Boston. I'm telling you about the market failures that preceded our market redesign. Boston didn't have a congestion problem. They already had a computerized, centralized matching system. So they had no trouble getting everyone matched long before September 1st or whenever the school started. But they had what we call an immediate acceptance system, and it was very, very well-intentioned. Their idea was that they would ask families to list their choices. And in Boston, I'm talking not just about high schools, but starting with kindergarten. They would ask families to list their choices. And then they would try to give as many people as possible their 1st choice. Now, of course, it often happened that a school, a desirable school, had many more people applying to it as their 1st choice than they could fit in their capacity. And what they would do in that case is they would order the children according to some priority. The highest priority was given to children who had an older sibling already attending the school. That way parents would have only 1 drop-off in the morning. The next priority was given to people who lived near the school, and then there was a random number priority. So they would order the children in order of priority. If they had 20 places in a kindergarten, they would give those places to the first 20 people and reject the rest. And then, after they'd done that in all the schools, they would look at all the people who hadn't gotten their 1st choice, and they would try to give as many of them as possible their 2nd choice, and do it the same way, and then as many people as possible their 3rd choice. So, of course, this system also makes it unsafe to confide your preferences for schools to the Boston public school system. Because if you don't get your 1st choice, there's an excellent chance that all the seats in your 2nd choice will have been filled by people who said it was their 1st choice. And so even a school at which you have very high priority, maybe at your second choice school, you already have a child going to that school. So if you said it was your first choice, you would have high enough priority to get in for sure. But if you don't say it's your first choice, all the seats will be filled. You'll lose your priority. So once again, in Boston, as in New York, you couldn't safely tell the school system what your preferences were. You had to think, what's the best school I can get by saying that it's my first choice. What this meant, of course, was that in Boston, it looked like almost everyone was getting their first choice. That is, many, many people said that the school for which they had high priority was their first choice. So, it's a benign system in intent. It's easy to describe, but it's hard to play. If you're a parent, it's hard to figure out how you should fill out your rank order list. You have to know which schools are over-demanded, which schools are popular. You have to know lots of things. And indeed, in Boston, when you looked in the wealthier parts of the city, where parents were deeply invested in this process, what you found is they engaged in extensive intelligence on the schools, long before the school system knew who was going to apply to kindergarten. The school system doesn't meet the younger brothers and sisters until they apply to kindergarten. The families would know how many children were applying to the local kindergarten who already had older sibs in the school. So they would know out of 20 places in the Linden kindergarten that there were really only 12 that were available to people who didn't already have children in the school, things like that. And they would be forced to do all sorts of calculations about how to fill out their rank order lists. So the way we fixed that, both in New York and in Boston, and this is something that resembles the medical match, incidentally, is we're using something called the deferred acceptance algorithm that's due to David Gale and Lloyd Shapley. When I say it's due to them, it actually was invented many times in many marketplaces. It was first studied mathematically in a game theoretic way by Gale and Shapley in 1962, who were unaware that it was a mechanism that was found in various clearinghouses. But it's a mechanism that has some historical use in clearinghouses. And here's how it works. We ask everyone for preferences. So families fill out preferences. And in New York, where principals have preferences, the principals have preferences. In Boston, what we put in instead is the priorities that students have at each school. Those act like the preferences of the school. And the first thing is the students' preference lists are private, so schools don't see them. So right away, that disables the possibility that a principal can adopt the strategy of saying, we will only admit you if you rank us first. Principals in New York no longer know how you rank them. Okay? And then what happens, what the computerized clearinghouse does, is it has each student apply to his or her first choice school. And each school looks at how many applications it gets and how many places it has. And it orders the students in order of its preferences or priorities. And it sees how many it can accommodate. And it doesn't accept the ones it can accommodate yet. It's going to defer acceptance. That's why this is a deferred acceptance algorithm. It's going to defer acceptance until it sees who else might apply. But it immediately rejects all the students it can't fit in. So a kindergarten that has 20 places and gets 40 applications will rank the students in order of preference, which includes a random tiebreaker for ranking otherwise tied students, and reject numbers 21 through 40. Now, everyone, and it holds the rest. It doesn't reject the first 20, but it doesn't accept them yet either. Everyone who's been rejected now applies to his or her second choice. And the schools that get these applicants order them according to their original preference list, their original priority list. So if they get 10 more applicants, they now have 30 applicants, and they order them in their original preference list. So they no longer remember who applied first and who applied second. And they keep the top 20, and they reject the rest. What this means is that students who apply in that second round, who are applying to their second choice, haven't lost their priority. If you have a sibling who goes to the school, then you go right to the top of the list whenever you apply. Okay, this is important. I'll get back to that. And at each step, every student who is rejected applies to their next highest ranked choice, and the algorithm stops when no more applications are forthcoming, and that's when the acceptances are made. At that point, and only then, does every school accept the entering class of kids who it hasn't yet rejected. So this has a couple of important properties that Gale and Shapley studied in their 1962 paper. And one of them is that principals can't get better students by withholding places. To put it another way, that outcome is stable in the sense that there's never going to be a student and a school principal who aren't matched to each other, who would both prefer to be matched to each other. So think about why that's true. Supposing you're a principal who used to hold some places back in New York. Now, you can be pretty sure that there aren't going to be students coming to apply to you who you would rather have than the ones you're assigned for the match. Why is that? If they preferred you to the school that they were assigned to, it would have meant that they had already applied to you, right? Because they only apply to their third choice after they've been rejected by their second choice. So if they're in their third choice school and you were their second choice, it means they applied to you and you rejected them because you had already filled your places with schools that you like better. So there aren't going to be better kids than you can be assigned through the centralized match lining up on your door. Another thing that you can say, this is something that I proved much later, is that it's safe for families to submit their true preferences. And that has to do with the fact that you don't lose your priority at a school. One of the things you can show is that your chance of getting into your second choice school, if you get rejected by your first choice school, is just the same as it would be if you had listed that school as your first choice. So you don't have to worry about which school you list as your first choice. You can tell the truth and spend your energy figuring out which school is your first choice. If you're looking for a kindergarten in Boston, you might be concerned with which kindergarten teacher is good with shy boys, if you have a shy boy, for instance. And that's a different task of gathering information than figuring out which schools are popular and which schools have lots of places and which schools have only a few places. So it requires a different kind of information. And it's a political process to get a new school choice system adopted. We spoke at public meetings. And to our surprise, to our pleased surprise, this was popular among both the people representing the unsophisticated parents and people representing the sophisticated parents. We'd worried that maybe the sophisticated parents would think that they had some advantage with the system because you had to be very strategic. But in fact, it was a lot of work gathering all the information you needed to do to be strategic, and it interfered with the other work, visiting classrooms to see how the children got along. And of course, the relatively unsophisticated families, many of them we were able to demonstrate were making mistakes in how they filled out their rank order lists, for instance, by ranking as second a school that no one had ever gotten into as a second choice. So to our pleased surprise, this received a lot of political support from all parts of the Boston and New York communities. And you could start to see an effect right away. So in New York City, instead of 30,000 children unmatched until the end of August, only 3,000 were. And 3,000 in New York City with 90,000 high school students is about as small a number as you can get. Many of them, many of these 3,000 do not submit preference lists. Right? It's just hard to communicate with all of them in an effective way. But the other unexpected thing that happened was the first 4 years, the match in New York worked better and better, even though no further changes were made in the algorithm. So let me show you what I mean by that. In the second year, the number of people who got their first choice was higher than in the first year. The number of people who got their first or second choice was higher than in the first year. The number of people who got their first or second or third choice was higher. So this is something we say the second year distribution stochastically dominates the first. And that happened again in the third year. And it sort of leveled off in the fourth year. And so the question is, what's going on? No changes were being made in the algorithm. Well, what happened here is the system got safer to participate in. And so all those seats that were being withheld by principals started coming back onto the open market. The principals learned that they couldn't do better by holding some seats until after the assignment had been made. And so essentially, this was a process that created more seats at good schools in the centralized process. So that was a nice thing to see. And it has to do with the fact that that the previous system wasn't safe either for families or for school principals. But by making a system that made it safe to reveal your preferences and reveal your capacities, you could put more kids in schools where they wanted to go. So let me move on and talk about some other markets. And let me think a little bit about commodity markets first. I'm going to come back to the kidney exchange at the end, which is a real, not commodity market. But let's think a little about commodity markets, because they need design too. So commodity markets need a great deal of design. Let's think a little bit about wheat. So the US market for wheat in the 1800s was a matching market because every field of wheat is different. So you have to inspect it before buying the wheat. You have to find out what kind of wheat is in the field. And maybe you have a long-term relationship with farmers who grow the kind of wheat you want to buy. And that's a cumbersome process. And what I say in the book is that God made wheat, but the Chicago Board of Trade made #2 hard red winter wheat. And #2 hard red winter wheat is what we make bread out of. And it's a commodity. You can buy it without inspecting it. It's already been inspected. It has this pretty well-defined standard. And so that allows you to trade #2 hard red winter wheat as a financial commodity. You can buy futures. You can buy it before it's been planted. You can trade it. You don't need to know who you're buying it from. So of course that's a real market design advantage. Not everything can be made into a commodity, but commodity markets aren't just worn, right? Wheat is not a commodity, and all of those adjectives: #2 hard red, white, hard, white, soft, etc. All those things mean something, and they allow you to buy and classify wheat and buy it at a distance. Another market I mentioned in my book is the commodity exchange in Ethiopia, which now grades coffee successfully. So they need to grade coffee successfully, they need the graders to be able to sample the coffee anonymously, so you can't pay them to give you to say that your coffee is grade A. But now that they've done that, it's possible to buy coffee at a distance. You no longer have to send your man to Addis to taste the coffee. You can buy it from far away. And it's also increased the quality of the coffee because it turns out when you buy coffee, you're buying the bean, which is ground. But to harvest good coffee, you want to wait until the cherry is red, until the cherry is ripe. But you can't easily tell that by inspection, but the tasters can tell it. So it used to be economical to harvest a whole hillside of coffee at the same time when it was mostly red. But now that you can get better prices for grade A coffee, it's economical to tell your pickers just harvest the red cherries and we'll come back later and harvest the ones that aren't red yet. So making things commodities doesn't always, it standardizes the quality, it doesn't necessarily reduce the quality, it can raise the quality by giving the growers the rewards of producing high quality coffee. So since commodity contracts are financial contracts, they're traded, they can be financial commodities like common stock, or they can be commodities for cocoa and hog bellies traded on the Chicago Board of Trade. And those used to be traded in open outcry auction in pits, something like this, where people would signal to each other and shout and yell. And of course, we don't do that anymore. Now, lots of the trading is done by computers. And that one question we can ask, that's being asked now, is maybe the rules by which we run the exchanges should change as the form of the exchanges is changing. Right? So one of the things that's happening now is lots of trade are made by, not just made over computers, but are made by computers. There's a lot of algorithmic trading, some of it very, very fast. So let me tell you a little bit about a recent paper by a student of mine named Eric Budish at the University of Chicago and his colleagues Crampton and Shim. And if you've seen The Big Short, you know something about high-speed trading already. Both the New York Stock Exchange and the Chicago Mercantile Exchange used market designs that were well suited to open outcry trading. And in particular, the rules are that when I put up a bid or an ask, the first person to accept it gets the contract. So these are first come, first served, continuous double auction markets. Double auction means you can post a bid or an ask, and first come, first served means anyone who can take my bid or anyone who takes my ask, and the first one gets it. Now, this can create a race for speed. We'd like markets to compete on price, but there can also be competition by speed. So sometimes very similar commodities are traded in New York and Chicago. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Standard & Poor's 500 indices. So the same underlying bundle of economic commodities are traded in both places. And so it's valuable to have information about the prices in both places. And it used to be the fastest lines that conveyed that information went by road. And by road, it's 790 miles. And signals travel at the speed of light. So 790 miles gives you pretty fast communication between New York and Chicago. But there was competition by speed. So in 2010, someone spent $300 million to dig a high-speed fiber that cut the time from 6 milliseconds to 13 milliseconds. So it cut it by 3 milliseconds. And those 3 milliseconds turned out to give a big advantage to traders who would get the news 3 milliseconds in advance. Now, to put things into context, it takes you between 100 and 400 milliseconds to blink your eyes, right? So economic news doesn't happen at the speed of milliseconds, but prices can be signaled that way. So subsequently, that's not. So subsequently, the time is down to about 8.5 milliseconds. And billions of dollars are spent each year on these fast lines. So that's one thing that you might worry about, that billions of dollars are being spent on something that isn't socially useful, right? Because we can't respond to economic news in milliseconds, right? It takes me at least a second to understand the latest economic news. But there's something even more insidious than that, which is that this competition by speed interferes with the competition by price. Okay? So because the market is first come, first served, there are these opportunities for arbitrage. That's why people are looking to trade quickly. And those opportunities, if you like, keep the same commodities having the same prices elsewhere. So here's a picture, hour by hour, of trading on the two markets of basically the same things. Standard & Poor's 500 futures in a form that they're traded in Chicago and in New York. And what you see is hour by hour, at 10 o'clock they have around the same price, at 11 o'clock they have the same price. The price is moving through the day, and here's, somewhere after, between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, there's a big move, but they move together when you look at a graph that's hour by hour. But if you look at millisecond by millisecond, when you look at that big move, it's going to happen first in one of the markets and only later in the other. So here we are millisecond by millisecond, and here we are in the late 1:51, and one of the markets moves before the other one catches up. And that's why people want to do high-speed trading, is you can see the market move one place and you know it's going to catch up milliseconds later in the other place, and maybe you can trade in that time. And in particular, maybe you can trade, maybe I'm a liquidity provider and I've got a bid and an ask, and you can trade, because you have the news that the price move before I do, you can trade on my old bid and ask when they're stale. My last quotations are out of date, but I don't know it yet. And you can be the first to grab them, even before I can change them. So that's the impetus. What that means is that if I'm a liquidity provider and I'm providing bids and asks, the way I compete on price is I try to provide the closest, the smallest spread, right, to buying and selling. But if I'm afraid that you're going to snipe my stale quotes, I have to spread them apart further. So I make price competition happen less vigorously. Now, the arbitrage opportunities, the amount of time that those opportunities last has gone down as trading becomes faster. But the profits you can make by being the first to get an arbitrage opportunity has stayed constant. So that's why billions of dollars are being spent to pick up this money that's left lying on the floor of one exchange or the other. So the proposal that Eric Budish and his colleagues have made is they said, what should we do about this? They said, instead of continuous trading, maybe we should just have trading once a second. Okay, a second is a very short time for economic news, but lots of buy and sell orders come in a second. And so you could have what's called a call market. You could accumulate all the offers that come in a whole second and transact them at the price at which supply equals demand. These are financial commodities. And that would restore price competition. The way you would get the transactions is by having the best price, not by being there first, because a second is slow enough that everyone can get there in a second. So that's the kind of market design change that's being talked about as a response to changes in technology. And I think we're often, more and more, going to see market designs that respond to technology. Let's think a little bit about that with other markets. Think about eBay. eBay couldn't really exist until the internet existed, because it was a way of running garage sales around the world over the internet. But Uber couldn't exist until we had smartphones that knew where we were and had apps, because you can't order an Uber from your office computer. Your Uber app needs to know where you are. So new markets like eBay became possible with the internet, and new markets like Uber became possible with smartphones. And what we're seeing in the financial markets is new technology and trading might make certain kinds of old marketplace designs serve less well than they used to. So I think that we're going to see constant interplay between technology and market design. So let me tell you a bit now about maybe the most unusual market that I've worked on, which is kidney exchange. And one reason it's unusual is we don't allow money to play any role at all in deciding who gets a kidney. Okay, so the background on kidney exchange is kidney failure is a deadly disease. The treatment of choice is transplantation. There's a treatment that will keep you alive while you wait for a transplant, which is dialysis, but it works less and less well over time, and eventually you're basically tethered to a machine many hours a week and can't hold down your regular job. And there's a big shortage of transplantable organs. So that this morning in the United States, there were just over 100,000 people on the waiting list for deceased donor kidneys. Now, deceased donor kidneys, the place you've most likely encountered the opportunity to put your name on the registry for deceased donor kidneys is when you apply for a driver's license. I imagine in Tennessee it works the way it does in California. I have a little red dot on my driver's license, which says that when I applied for my California driver's license, I checked yes to a box that said, would you like to be on the registry of donors? But there aren't enough deceased donors, because even if you're on the registry, there's only about a 1% chance that you die in a way that leaves transplantable organs behind. Mostly, dying is very bad for your organs. So the wait is long. We only had about 11,000 deceased donor transplants in the United States. There are 100,000 people on the list. So people wait years, and it's costly to wait and dangerous. So thousands of people die each year while waiting. Now, kidneys are unusual, though, because there's another source of kidneys for transplantation. You each have 2 kidneys. And if you're as healthy as I hope you are, then you could remain healthy with just one. And that means if you knew someone who had end-stage renal disease, if you knew someone who was dying of kidney failure, you could offer to give them a kidney. Now, you have to pass through lots of tests yourself before you can give someone a kidney. But presuming you pass through them all, you might still find that although you're healthy enough to give someone a kidney, you can't give it to the person you love. And that's because kidneys have to be carefully matched to their recipients. Not everyone can take everyone else's kidneys. Just incidentally, the chance that one of you could take my kidney if I didn't know my blood type, the unconditional probability that one of you could take my kidney is somewhat over 50%. The chance that my wife could take my kidney is only about 30%. And that's because my wife and I are parents. And in the course of childbirth, my wife's immune system might have become exposed to some of the proteins that our boys inherit from me. And if so, she might have antibodies to those proteins waiting to attack my kidney if it should appear. So it could be that I'm healthy enough to give a kidney to someone, but I can't give it to my wife. And it could be that you're healthy enough to give a kidney to someone, but you can't give it to your brother. And that's what opens up the possibility of exchange. Maybe I can give a kidney to your brother, and you can give a kidney to my wife. So the simplest kind of exchange has to do with just simple blood type incompatibilities. I was just describing to you more complicated incompatibilities having to do with the immune system. But here's donor 1 who is blood type A, who loves recipient 1 who needs a kidney, but who has blood type B. That's going to make it hard, not quite impossible, but difficult and not good to try to transplant that kidney. And here's another pair with the reverse problem. So the simplest form of kidney exchange is the blood type A kidney goes to the blood type A recipient, and the blood type B kidney goes to the blood type B recipient. So this is an exchange. You can immediately understand why economists are involved, because we study exchange. Turns out that our surgical colleagues didn't immediately understand that economists were fellow members of the helping professions. And so we had a number of discussions before we get this going. We wrote a paper on kidney exchange, and we sent it to all the surgeons we could think of, and only one answered. But that one was Frank Delmonica, and we helped him start the New England program for kidney exchange, and it's since spread around the world. So notice that no money changes hands. I already told you that we don't use money for kidneys in the United States. Here's the piece of law that says you can't use money for kidneys. This is a phrase from the National Organ Transplant Act of 1984. It says, it should be unlawful for any person to knowingly acquire, receive, or otherwise transfer any human organ for valuable consideration for transplantation. So that's a slightly complicated legal sentence. And you might wonder whether this exchange involves valuable consideration. Something is being exchanged. It's valuable. It saves a life. Is it legal? Well, we started kidney exchange in the early 2000s, and the Justice Department declined to write us a memo saying, of course it's legal. The law just means to prevent commercial transactions. But eventually, an amendment to the law was passed, the Charlie Norwood Living Organ Donation Act, which says the preceding sentence, that sentence, does not apply with respect to human organ paired donation. And paired donation is a polite word for kidney exchange that doesn't use the word exchange, and therefore doesn't sound like valuable consideration. So kidney exchange is explicitly legal in the United States. I was just in Germany, because my book just came out in German translation, and kidney exchange isn't legal in Germany. In Germany, the way they protect against commercial exchange is to say that you may receive a kidney only from someone in what they call your first order family, your parents, your spouse, your siblings, or your children. And that makes them pretty sure that the kidney that they're transplanting hasn't been bought. But of course, the same could be said in exchange. If I come with my brother and you come with your brother, we're each intending to give a kidney to our brother. So I'm presently involved in from a distance, lobbying the German government to change that law. Now, quite apart from the law, congestion is a big problem in kidney exchange. So let me tell you about that a little bit. I'm the man in the yellow gown, keeping my hands out of the way. And there's a kidney in this bucket, and you can't see it. Behind me in this picture, not in this picture, but off screen, behind me, just steps away, is another operating room where a nephrectomy has just been performed, and that this kidney has just been hand carried just steps from one operating room to another, and it's going into this gentleman. And this is happening in Cincinnati, Ohio, around 2006. And at the same time, in Toledo, Ohio, a nearby Ohio City, the other two operations are going on between the patient of this donor and the donor of this patient. So when I say at the same time, I mean literally at the same time. The doctors first anesthetize the patients and make the initial incisions for the nephrectomy and for the transplant. Then from the operating room, the man in the red cap is a man named Steve Whittle. He gets on his cell phone in the operating room and he calls Mike Reese in Toledo, Ohio, and says, "We're ready in Cincinnati. Are you ready in Toledo?" And when he hears that they are, the four operations go ahead. So why are they doing this complicated logistical arrangement? It's because you can't give valuable consideration for a kidney in the United States. That means you can't write a contract for a kidney. You can't write a contract that says, we will give you a kidney today and you will give us a kidney tomorrow. That's not an enforceable contract. So to make sure both parts of the exchange go through, they do them at the same time. All right? Now, that means the simplest exchange of just two people involves 4 simultaneous operating rooms and 4 simultaneous surgical teams. So you have to assemble a lot of stuff to be able to do even a simple exchange. We'd like to do, of course, bigger exchanges because this very simple exchange involves what Jevons called the double coincidence of wants. You can only do a 2-pair exchange if each pair can use the kidney that the other pair has. But you can have more complicated patterns of compatibility than that. And If you can only do two-way exchanges because they involve 4 surgeries, you won't be able to do more than that. So in fact, we can get up to 3-way exchanges pretty regularly now, which involve 6 surgeries. But we'd like to be able to do much more than that. And what the opening to allow us to do that were chains of transplants that are initiated by non-directed donors. So a couple hundred times a year in the United States, someone comes forward and says, I would like to give a kidney, and I don't have a particular recipient in mind. And what that allows is a chain that doesn't have to circle back to itself. It allows a kidney to be given to a pair that then gives a kidney to another pair, a patient-donor pair, right? So a kidney is given to a patient whose donor gives a kidney to another patient, whose donor gives a kidney to another. So here's again a very early picture, a 2007 story about a 2006 exchange. And here's a photograph of what the people look like once they're up and about again. And one question is, why are there only 6 people in the picture? And the answer is we were doing 6 was the maximum number of surgical operating rooms and surgical teams that we could assemble at one time. And so that was the biggest we could do. But you can ask the question of, do we have to do all these simultaneously? Because when you have a non-directed donor, it's possible to organize the exchange so that each patient-donor pair receives a kidney before they have to give one, which is really important because what you're worried about in a broken link is that some pair has given a kidney, doesn't get one in return. So of course they've gone to a lot of difficulty and discomfort, but more important, they no longer have a kidney so that next week when we do another kidney exchange, they won't be able to participate. So we don't ever want a pair to be left without a kidney because they've given one and not gotten one in return. But if we can make sure that each pair, if we can organize a chain so that each pair gets a kidney before they give one, that won't be a problem. And the very first kidney exchange chain had 20 people in the picture. Okay? And we now have much longer ones sometimes. This one has 60 people in the picture. There are some longer ones still. This is a photograph from the New York Times at the time it happened. And the average chain in the United States has 5 transplants. It has 10 people in the picture. So what that means is by organizing exchanges so that sometimes there's a gap so that we can reuse the same operating rooms or use distant operating rooms that couldn't be assembled at the same time, we can get a lot more transplants. Now, there's a cost to that, which is that sometimes the chain might be broken. Turns out the people who have an opportunity to break a chain are, well, the people who get asked to wait are called bridge donors. We only lose about 2% of bridge donors. So since we're getting 5 transplants per chain, that's well worth it. And for you economists in the audience, it's easy to think of economic models in which we'd lose 100% of bridge donors. You say, once my sister gets a kidney, I'm no longer interested in giving a kidney. But it turns out that people are a whole lot nicer than simple economic models might give them credit for. So in fact, we lose very few, and this is a good market design solution to the congestion problem, of having to assemble so many operating rooms and surgical teams in order to carry out big transactions. All right, so kidney exchange has grown in the United States. It's from a small beginning. It's been growing pretty rapidly. It's been growing around the world. I keep a blog. These are blog posts I put up whenever a new kidney exchange is done somewhere. You can see the most recent one is this month in Singapore, first kidney exchange in Singapore. But there are lots of parts in the world where this kind of healthcare doesn't reach. So here's a chart that shows in blue deceased donor transplants per million population, and in orange living donor transplants per million population. And here we are in the United States, and you see we have a lot of both. We're doing pretty well that way. But there are, well, Germany, you can't easily see here, but it's somewhere, it looks something like this. It has reasonable number of deceased donors, but not so many living donors. It might be this one, I'm not sure. That's because they make it hard to do living donor transplants in Germany. And there are parts of the world which have very little transplantation. Okay? So one of those is the Philippines. And the Philippines has excellent hospitals. You could get a kidney transplant in the Philippines, and it would work. You know, the doctors are, there are hospitals where the doctors are first rate. But there are financial barriers in the Philippines. Philippine health insurance doesn't cover things like kidney transplantation. In fact, the national insurance covers something like 40 days of dialysis a year, which is just enough, which means that kidney disease is a death sentence in the Philippines. And so one of the questions my colleagues and I are now asking is, is there a practical way, logistically and financially, to extend American quality health care through a mutual benefit system to patients in the Philippines? Because of course, kidney exchange is a mutual benefit exchange, right, where people help each other out. So let's think about that a little bit. Okay, so this is a paper with a variety of co-authors. Mike Reese is the surgeon involved in this. So what we're talking about is an exchange at its simplest between two pairs, where the American pair is incompatible, where they are always just about in American kidney exchange. And the developing world pair is incompatible probably for financial reasons. That is, they don't have access to transplantation, although someone needs a kidney and his spouse would like to give him a kidney. So we're now at the 1-year anniversary of the first pair that we tried for logistical reasons. And they participated in a long chain. Actually, here's a picture of the chain to date. So it's got 11 transplants in it so far, and they're right here. They helped make the chain possible. You know, they made it work. And they came to Toledo, Ohio, and got transplants in an American hospital. And you know, the nephrectomy and the transplant. And then they were sent home with an escrow fund that allows them to get the best care that's available in the Philippines, which is very good. But what we'd like to do, the market design task, is to make this self-financing, right? Not to do this on a trial basis, but to do it on a permanent basis and make it free to the developing world pairs. And the reason that's possible is every time you transplant an American, it saves the American healthcare system at least $250,000 because dialysis is so much more expensive than transplantation. So the savings accrue either to private insurers or to Medicare. The additional costs accrue to transplant centers. But the savings are sufficient so that you can pay the Filipino pair, you can pay for their surgery and for their care for the rest of their lives afterwards. So this particular pair is now a year home in the Philippines and thriving and able to get the care and the immunosuppressive drugs that they need. But the market design here is going to do financial engineering, making sure that the savings that are accrued in one part of the healthcare system can be applied to the places where the new costs are accrued, which is the surgeries and the medications for the developing world pair. So that's a serious political job. You know, getting Medicare to write a check for the care of someone who isn't a Medicare patient is probably going to be impossible. We're trying to work now through the private insurers. So let me end by saying that matching markets are really important. There are lots of them that don't work well because they're more complicated than commodity markets, right? Commodity markets are all about price discovery, but matching markets have to have all these other institutions because you care who is matched with whom, because you can't just choose what you get. You can't just choose who gets what. And some of these matching markets that I've already told you about are some really important ones. When you think of the big milestones in your life, they might have to do with what schools you go to, what universities, what jobs you get, you know, who you marry, whether you get an organ for transplant when you need one to save your life. So, you know, one of the ways, well, I spoke earlier today to graduate students in the economics department, and one of them asked me, where should one look for ideas for markets to study? And one place to look for ideas for markets to study is in markets that are failing, that aren't working well. And one of them to think about now is refugee resettlement. Okay, there are a lot of people moving around the world, and they need to find places to go. And that's a matching market. You can't just send refugees where you would like them to go, because refugees are precisely the people who, when they were somewhere where they didn't want to be, got up and moved, often with great obstacles. And of course, we're reading about this mostly in Europe, but this is a problem also for the United States, not just politically defined refugees by the UN, but migrants of all sorts, including illegal migrants. So here in the United States, many people would like to come live in the United States. If we're not going to build a wall, we can't even keep them all out. So we have to think about how to resettle them. And refugees aren't just widgets. You can't send them where they want to go. And the American refugee policy and the European refugee policy had this idea that you could spread refugees thinly across the country where they would assimilate visibly. But that hasn't worked in the United States. So for example, one of the big communities of Somali Americans is in Lewiston, Maine. Maine is not a state with a climate like Somalia. So they don't go there because you come from Somalia, so of course you would live in Maine and use your cross-country skiing skills. They come to Lewiston, Maine because there's a Somali community. And it turns out if you're a Somali person, there are some advantages to being in a Somali community. And that's something that's reproduced itself with all the migrant groups in the United States when you think about it. So I live in California. And if you come to California and you speak Mandarin or you speak Spanish, you can get a job before you learn English. Right? If you're a carpenter, say, you can find someone who will employ you and give you instructions in Mandarin and talk to the customer in English. And so you can be gainfully employed while you're learning English. You still need to learn English in California. But if you move to Wisconsin, the only assistance we could give you would be getting government forms in Mandarin so you could apply for refugee assistance. Whereas in California, you can be employed. You can be integrated into the economy very quickly. So we have to start thinking of refugees as communities. Right? Something about a matching problem for refugees is not about individuals. It's about societies. And right now, as we're seeing the refugee crisis unfolding in Europe, it's too late to think about this in a very orderly way. We're making the Europeans and the Turks are making agreements about sending people back to Turkey, and all sorts of bad things are happening. But this will be an opportunity for us to learn what doesn't work, and also maybe what works, so that for future refugee crises, we'll be able to do a better job of organizing that matching market. And if the sea level rises, there will be many more refugees in the future. So this is a matching problem well worth thinking about. Let me stop there. Thank you.
We have time for some questions.
Hi.
Now, speak up, please.
So you spoke about your whole market design for New York City high schools. I'm from New York, so I had gone to
What high school do you go to?
Stuyvesant High School.
Okay, that's an exam school, so.
Yeah, it's an exam school, so it's aside from the process. But would you say that the college admissions process should also come up your whole model? Because right now it isn't. There's Vanderbilt offers, for example, early decisions, basically a first priority applicant. I think Stanford offers something similar. So why or why not?
Okay, so the question, in case you couldn't hear, was would college admissions profit from some kind of school choice matching design of the sort we do in New York? I think the answer is partially yes, although I don't see it as being ripe for that. So let me talk about college admissions in a moment, but preface my remark by saying that which markets are ripe for redesign aren't necessarily the ones that aren't working well, but they have to be working so badly that the amount of coordination that's needed to change them is available. Right? So right now, college admissions is working arguably pretty badly, but I don't get the sense that all the colleges are willing to get together and do something very different. Now, why might they be? What are the problems that are going on? Well, as the questioner said, there's some unraveling. The market's getting less thick. It's becoming less safe to reveal what's your first choice because many colleges, through an early decision or binding early decision program, early action, sometimes give an advantage to people who apply to them early and either commit to come or commit to not apply to anyone else early. So sending that early signal can be useful. It shows you're really interested in that college, but of course it's it's not safe to send that signal to the college you would like to go to most, because that college might not have room for you, even if you use your one silver bullet there. So high school students are faced with that kind of signaling problem. There's also a congestion problem. Since the development of the Common App, it's very easy to apply to lots of colleges, which increases the need for signaling, because simply getting an application from someone no longer indicates a level of interest in your college that it used to do when they had to handwrite their essays, and applying to another college was difficult. So there's a congestion problem, there's strategic problems. The advice I give in my book is I say, if you're talking to a high school senior, he has to think about how to signal not just how interested the college should be in him, what a good student he'd be, but also how interested he is in the college, because colleges face this congestion problem. They need to manage their yield. So certainly someone who, for instance, visits a Vanderbilt campus would be well advised to drop by the admissions office and sign the guest book so that they know that he's come to visit, because these expressions of interest play increasingly large roles in admissions. Now, could we design a system that might be better? I think you could design one that might work better if it would get lots of participation. I don't yet see a great deal of interest in redesigning the admission system in a big way. A bunch of colleges and universities are trying to create an alternative to the Common App right now that will involve all sorts of strange things like submitting essays during the whole time you're in high school and things like that. I don't know what's going to become of that, but that's a sort of a minor tweak on the Common App, not a major redesign.
So some of the commodities that you took, like kidney, it's obvious that prices fail, that you cannot use prices to clear the market out.
In Iran, they have a monetary market for kidneys.
Right, and sometimes it's just legal considerations, but sometimes some commodities are just gray, where you don't know if prices are going to clear the market or not, or whether you need a matching framework to design them. So something like so say take a labor market, where I don't know whether an equilibrium wage is going to clear this market, or whether I should use a matching framework to design this market. So how as a mechanism designer, do you know when to use the matching framework, or when to let the markets be on their own?
Okay, so how do you know when you need a matching framework? I think what you're asking is, when do you need a centralized clearinghouse? Right? Because I think of labor markets as matching markets, even when they're run in a decentralized way. Google hires different engineers at different salaries. So there's not a price that clears the market, but and of course prices are very important, and stock options and other things. But centralized clearinghouses are probably going to be a minority form of market organization, because they tend to work best when one of the problems they tend to solve is making a thick market, and they do that best when everyone comes on the market at the same time. So high school students all need a new place in high school at the same time. Medical graduates all need a residency at the same time. New economists, loosely speaking, new Ph.D. economists all need jobs starting in the fall semester. So the production function of medical schools and of universities has already coordinated on a time, and now the question is how to let the market take advantage of that. Whereas markets for mid-career engineers aren't necessarily like that. You get a contract, you need to hire a bunch of engineers at any time. So it's not clear that a centralized clearinghouse is what's needed for design. But in a lot of decentralized markets, what design consists of is designing the rules of engagement. What does it mean to make an offer? How long can you decide? How much notice do you have to give if you're not coming or if you're leaving? Things like that. So there's still plenty of market design to do in decentralized markets. And I think of labor markets as virtually all being matching markets, whether organized in a centralized or decentralized way.
I'm a surgery resident here, and I think all of us who have been in medical lab in the last several years have had the experience of being pressured at one time or another by the program to reveal our ranking, and part of the motivation behind that is a certain amount of prestige on the program side, with saying that, well, last year we only had to go down to 10%. For the most
So the question is, one of the ways the medical residency match is currently broken is in its interviewing part of the process, right? So the part that my colleagues and I have helped design is after the interviews are all over, you submit your rank order list, much the way I described to you for schools, with some additional concerns about the structure of medical education, including the fact that there are about 1,000 couples on the market last year of 17,000 medical graduates, so about 2,000 people looking for 2 jobs together. But one thing that happens in the interviewing stage, which undermines some of the benefit of the match, is that residency directors, employers, look you in the eye and they say, you know, we really like you. We would rank you to match. We would rank you at the top of our list. If you rank us as your first choice, will you do that? And that's an illegal question. The rules of the match say you're not supposed to do that. And the reason they say you're not supposed to do that is if you felt compelled to answer that question truthfully, you would lose one of the big benefits of the match, which is it makes it safe to put down your true choices. If someone can extort from you the promise that you'll rank them first, you lose your ability to really try to get the hard-to-get, unlikely, but true first choice. So that's why it's against the rules of the match to do that. When you look at surveys of medical students, they're a little interesting. About 20%, maybe a little less, of medical students report that they've gotten a question of this sort. And when they're asked how they respond, I interpret the answer as saying, when I'm asked if someone is my first choice, I always respond truthfully, unless they're not my first choice. And so, you know, it's against the rules to ask that question. And one of the ways the medical match has tried to deal with it is to say, you know, they're already off base when they ask that question. You can look them in the eye and say, that sounds like a good idea to me. And then go ahead and try to get a better place if you can by ranking it higher. One reason lawyers trying to get clerkships with appellate judges can't get a match going is that it might be okay to answer deceptively to someone who asks you an illegal question in medicine, but there just aren't enough appellate judges to have one of them who hates you. So that doesn't work in the law. But it is a problem. And you referred to, it turns out at a lot of hospitals, some vice president for human resources likes to ask each residency program, how far down your list did you have to go? And this also really harms the idea that you can put down your true preferences. I should be willing to put you down even though I think you're likely to go to Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, which is a very fancy hospital. But it would be great to have you in my residency program, and it should be safe for me to put you down. But it's not if my vice president of human resources is going to say, how come you never get your first choice? It's the right answer to that is you're not choosing the right people as your first choice if you always get them. You should be looking for the best, and they're hard to get. But it is true that at a number of hospitals we get reports that they feel constrained about doing this. So these have to do with the market culture, and that's something that is not in the written rules and can also be broken and has to be worked on. I've been involved in creating fellowship matches for gastroenterologists and orthopedic surgeons. And I won't go into details, but gastroenterologists and orthopedic surgeons have really different market cultures. And so needed different solutions in how to get clearinghouses working effectively. Sorry?
Just to follow up on your fellowship idea, I direct a fellowship program with a supply exceeds the demand. So there are more programs available than applicants. So we've been trying to implement a match where many people say they will never retain you. The second and third tier programs feel very threatened by it. They feel the top programs will take the applicants, they will be left with no one. So they prefer having gamesmanship, leaving the whole field.
So they're going very early and going after residents in their...
I'm just curious how to understand that.
Well, so there are resident and fellowship matches that successfully work with more positions than applicants. Infectious diseases is one. Needless to say, when there are more positions than there are applicants, probably we're going to have lots of independent candidates, lots of candidates who came from foreign medical schools, or maybe you'll just have to hire more attending physicians. And not, if you have a program that isn't prestigious, then some programs are not going to fill all their positions, and those will typically not be the most prestigious ones. So that's true whether or not you have a match. So the kind of question you have to ask yourself is whether the good doctors are getting to go to the good programs, and are we making the best resources making the best use of the resources we have. So in gastroenterology, they had a match and lost one. And one of the things that happened to them was the market collapsed from being a national market when they had a match to being a very local market where people were being hired out of their internal medicine residencies in the early years, and they were tending not to move very far. They were often going to the same hospital. They were going to gastro fellowships in the same hospital where they did their internal medicine matches. So when it came time to try to fix that market, there were, of course, some gastroenterology fellowship directors who weren't in favor, and they were typically the ones who had medium quality fellowships at places that had first quality internal medicine residency programs, because they were able to, when the market was broken, they were able to get these internal medicine kids who they couldn't get otherwise, who would go to better places. But on the other hand, the three gastroenterology trade organizations managed to unite to decide that they wanted a national market again. So it took some work. And the way they did it, I said the gastro market culture is different from the orthopedic surgery market culture. The way they did it is they felt they didn't have the power to stop programs from making early offers, but they issued a statement saying that it would be okay for applicants who had accepted offers before the match to change their mind and go through the match. And that cut down a lot on early offers if you couldn't capture someone. So it cut down on the unraveling. It let people enter the match. In orthopedic surgery, they had a similar problem. And when they came to us, we said to them, oh, we're very clever. We help the gastroenterologists solve this problem. Just make a rule that says, young surgeons can change their mind if they've already accepted early offers. And they said, oh, that's impossible. That'll never happen. I mean, senior surgeons are too important. So we said to them, well, that's too bad, because probably you can't stop senior surgeons from making early offers. And they said, why not? We just won't allow them to deliver papers at our national convention if they make early offers. So the market cultures were quite different. The trade organizations, the professional organizations had very different powers in the two cases. But in both cases, they were able to get some fellowship matches going in an environment that had lots of unraveling, lots of very early exploding offers to capture young internal medicine or general surgery residents. So, without knowing the details, I can't say much, and probably your specialty will be different than gastro or orthopedic surgery, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a way to bring an orderly market. Yes? You have to speak up.
Yeah, so this is beautiful, and one of the challenges I think you run into, and I'm curious if you or your colleagues have explored this, is the notion of collusion across lines. So in many respects, you almost have like a bipartite system, right? You have people who are interested in participating, and you have receivers who want them to work together. And collusion can happen in multiple ways. You can have collusion between, like, across your bipartite graph, or you can have collusion between the nodes on each side of that graph, at which point it can distort what people are able to lay out as their optimal solutions.
All right. So the question is, do we see a lot of collusion? So I don't think we see a lot of collusion in the sense that you're talking about. There has been some. So family practice residencies had some rules that they eventually signed a consent decree with the Department of Justice as being in restraint of trade. So it's possible to agree not to poach on each other's typical applicant pool, for instance. That turns out to be against the law. You see competition of various organized sorts. So in gastroenterology, there's a single gastroenterology fellowship match. But in orthopedic surgery, there are multiple orthopedic surgery fellowship matches, partly because some orthopedic surgery specialties are more prestigious than others, and the ones that felt they were less prestigious wanted to run their match earlier than the ones that were more prestigious. So not it's hard to define the scope of the market. Which marketplaces form sometimes can have to do with things like that. There's not collusion, but there's informational economies of scale. So the Harvard hospitals know the Harvard medical students pretty well by the time they're on the residency match, and often get the ones they want. I mean, they can talk to them in advance without matching with them in advance. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you certainly see patterns of movement from medical schools to residencies to fellowship programs that suggest that some places have efficient ways of sharing information with each other. Yes?
So this kind of brings up a question. In a typical market design problem, how much of it is sort of creating an algorithm that will work as long as everyone does what they're supposed to, and how much is trying to make it be sort of self-enforcing so that people do what they're supposed to?
So that's a good question. So to an economics audience, I would say the following. There's a theoretical part of economics called mechanism design. And what that sort of market design, if you didn't have to actually design any market. And what they sort of say is they say your job as the mechanism designer is to create a mechanism, create a marketplace such that all of its equilibria have the good property that you want to have. Whereas I would say about market design is, we don't even know all the rules of the game. People have large strategy sets. So our job is not to create a game, all of whose equilibrium have some good property. Our job is to create a set of rules that has one equilibrium that has good property, and then get people to play that equilibrium, right? So there's a lot of, so the National Resident Matching Program, for instance, part of its design, if you like, is this set of rules about what to do in interviews. Now those rules aren't self-enforcing, right? Those rules are broken, but parts of the rules that are in the centralized clearinghouse are enforced by computer code. Those rules are not broken. So it's a work in progress because people invent new strategies, right? The strategy space is huge. The economic theory takes the point of view as a game theorist. If you read papers in economics journals, they take the point of view that here's a game we want to study, and now we'll study it in great depth. But as a market designer, you're never quite sure what the game is, right? You see some of the rules, some of the moves, but other things you don't see. What would happen to college admissions in a year when Vanderbilt decided not to admit any freshmen, but to only admit sophomore transfers? Well, we have no idea what would happen, right? No fancy university like Vanderbilt has ever done that. Something would happen. There would be a lot of movement of people, but we don't know what it is. So I can't really ever claim to know all the moves in the game and what all the equilibria should be. But I can look at college admissions the way it exists today and say there seems to be a problem here. Let's tweak this and see if we can make that problem less. Okay, you're really going to have to yell.
This is more of a follow-up question. It's with regards to the media exchange. I understand that you're trying to expand to other places outside of the United States now. How do you see currently you have a level 2% of people dropping out, not being part of the change? And just worry that number will increase significantly when you start going to other countries. How do you plan to address that?
Okay, so I think what we're hoping to do is bring patients to the United States to take part in American Kidney Exchange, and at least for a long time, we would never make them bridge donors. We would include them in the simultaneous parts of exchanges so that they were never left short, and neither was anyone else, right? So I think that in particular, right, when we do a non-simultaneous chain, not every surgery is non-simultaneous. We tend to do 3 at a time. Right? So I think that if we're bringing some special pair in, we make sure they're in one of the 3 at a time, so that everything goes smoothly and we can guarantee that everything will work. Because whenever you try something new, if there's one early disaster, it kills the whole project.